Hi, it's Alison from the Law School Toolbox. Today, Lee and I are going to be chatting about AI use in law school, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, AI is here. It is now part of our everyday life, and students, especially in higher education, as I'm sure everyone listening to this probably knows, are using AI at pretty high rates, right, Lee?
Yeah, I've got to say, in prepping for this podcast, I knew that the rates were pretty high, but I don't know. It's weird to see it in actual numbers. Basically, everyone's using it, which I think everyone is using it, maybe except my parents are using it on a regular basis. But I think it is pretty clear that students are playing with it in lots of different ways. And I think in the law school situation, it's pretty interesting because law schools are like dinosaurs. They never want to change. So the fact that students are really using AI in law school is a unique challenge because the law schools, I think, are playing a lot of catch up. So, I mean, we've got data that says that basically for undergrads, 92% of students are using AI in their studies. Do you think the numbers are similar for law students right now?
I would imagine, at least the younger cohort of law students, you have some people maybe coming back who maybe weren't exposed to this quite so much in undergrad. But yeah, I mean, we've got studies from 2025 of college students, saying half of them are saying that mastering AI is the most important skill they expect to gain in college. 62% saying that learning to use AI responsibly is essential for their future. So law students are definitely living in this broader culture, even if the schools themselves are maybe not encouraging it quite as much. And some schools do. We had a podcast with some professors at your alma mater, USF, and they're using it in legal writing classes, which is interesting. We'll talk about more. So, we use it. We use it for a lot of things. I find it very useful. I was actually using it for some legal-ish work recently, and that was fascinating. So we'll talk about all this stuff, but we're not going to tell you, never touch it. We're also not going to tell you, let it do everything. So what we wanted to talk about was really what are students actually doing, what's working, what seems like a good idea, what seems like not a great idea, and how to use it as a future lawyer. So Lee, what do you know about how students are currently using AI?
Well, it seems like one of the main ways that students are using AI is for study help, almost like substantive tutoring. I think that general higher education research is also showing us that a lot of folks are using AI to support studying and prep. And some law school recommendations coming out of the schools or out of law libraries are even suggesting that it's acceptable to use AI for study uses. And the use cases I'm talking about is explaining doctrinal law, maybe in more plain language or explaining it in a different way than maybe your professor has explained it. Generating practice questions or hypos, which we'll be honest, it can be hit or miss. So,
but hey, there could be value in
there
realizing,
can be value.
Hey, this answer is completely wrong.
Right. Yeah, I think to me that's part of this is yes, you can use it to generate practice questions and hypos, but you also have to evaluate those practice questions and hypos, and the evaluation may be even the more impactful part of using the AI than the actual generating of the hypo. And then some students are finding it helpful to help making flashcards or summaries, although I think the challenging thing there is that over the years, students have purchased pre-packaged flashcards for various topics, especially around the bar. And some folks find that not making the flashcards means that the flashcards are kind of less helpful because the activity of making these study materials is actually one of the ways that you learn. So with all of these kind of uses, I think you have to be constantly evaluating whether or not you're still engaging or getting something out of it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Anybody studying for the bar can go buy critical pass flashcards.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that's effective. They see them and that helps. I saw an interesting study about people using AI to write things recently, which suggested that people just don't remember any of it because they didn't do it, which is very interesting. If you haven't struggled with that material, of course, it's not going to be in your brain the same way. It's just like purchasing a canned outline. It doesn't. Not to say it doesn't have utility in some cases, but it's not the same as actually doing it yourself. So Sometimes I talk to students, it's clear they're taking a lot of shortcuts, and they seem to just be wanting to check boxes and be like, oh, I did that thing, without really thinking about, is that getting me closer to my end goal? So I agree. You have to be constantly evaluating, what is this doing for me? Like, what use am I putting it to? If you're just like, I am totally confused about this topic, or I just need a summary of X, Y, or Z, like, sure, that's fine. Whatever. You could get that from another outline too. But I do think this kind of outsourcing your brain part and outsourcing the work is really the pain point here.
Yeah, I agree. It makes me think of the studies that came out probably decades ago about how much less retention we get from typing. When folks were talking about how, you can send an email and totally forget that you sent it, which has totally happened to me. Because we shoot off things at such speeds.
Right.
And it doesn't
like,
have, yeah. And it doesn't have the same tangible kind of engagement that like handwriting out a note would do. Oftentimes we're just like shooting off answers and doing things very quickly. And AI has taken us to a whole nother level of cognitive offloading. And I think then the question becomes like, what are you doing? What's your participation? And that's actually a really big question that we may end up over time having to redefine. Like, what is our own work? What is our role when computers can do some of this work for us? But being in school at this time with this emerging technology doesn't mean that you can just say like, well, it is what it is. Like, I'll just use it and see what happens. Because you're still going to be accountable for the work that you're doing. It's still your work, even if you use assistive tools. So, I think it's interesting. One of the things that I think is really powerful with AI is its ability to edit. So this is one of my things that I like to talk to folks about, is that if you're allowed to use AI to edit your work, you should, but that also means that there can be zero mistakes, like zero. And we get this when folks send us resumes. This is one of my things. I'm like, there's really no excuse anymore for having typos in a resume when the computer will just tell you what the typos are.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the standard for a lot of things, even like shooting off a quick email, are probably higher, because you're like, you know what, your program can just clean that up for you if needed.
Right.
Yeah, and I think this writing and editing piece is interesting, in the context of, I'm thinking of it as a law professor, what boundaries am I putting around that, knowing that people can do whatever they want, basically. So yeah, I mean, for me, when I was drafting these legal-ish documents, it was interesting because, I am an expert legal writer. I am an expert legal researcher. I literally got paid a lot of money by some of the most prestigious organizations anywhere to do this work. So for me, having this is sort of like this 10x multiplier of, I now have a research assistant who will just do whatever I ask them to do. The problem is it takes a lot of work to get to that point of being the expert. So, if you're not doing that hard work to get to the point where you understand what you want to say and how you want to say it, I think that's going to be really problematic for people.
I think that that's true. I think where there is a lot of value is, like you mentioned, with this research assistant role. Like, I was thinking back in law school when I was brainstorming my note, and I remember that they would tell you to go look for circuit splits, and they tell you to go kind of do all this research. And I'm like, wow, you could do that so much faster now and have this whole AI-based conversation to help you find these kind of open legal questions. I'm like, wow, that would have saved me so much time and probably made note topics a whole lot more interesting. You could also search to see what other people had written on to make sure that you weren't writing on something that somebody else had written on. So I feel like brainstorming, research projects, and things like that, if it's allowed by your school, is a really great way to use it. I know that some students are using it to brainstorm legal arguments and structures. And again, I think this is great, but you have to be evaluating them. And I think that that's hard as a law student because you're still learning legal arguments. And you can't be sure that it's right. And sometimes its arguments are really not very good.
That is the one thing I will say when I was doing this work. I was like, wow, that is not the correct analysis here. Like,
Yeah.
I understand that like why you might think this argument makes sense. I am telling you that argument is not persuasive because I know that.
Yeah.
But like when I was in law school, I might have just been like, oh, all right, well, Claude said, this is what I should argue. And yeah, it's very hit or miss. Sometimes it's incredible. You're like, that is spot on. And other times it's just like, no, that is no lawyer would ever think that that was correct.
No. I also think that it's going to be interesting to see how kind of grows, like this art form of writing changes with AI. One, is all of our legal writing going to sound exactly the same because it's all been pushed through these bots? Two, the bots are very verbose oftentimes, unless you tell them to be very, concise and precise. And I don't enjoy reading a lot of text that I don't need. And so there needs to be an engagement around that. I also don't love reading like email blasts that I get that I can tell are written by ChatGPT.
So many.
Just so many. And unless it's a summary of something, which I appreciate a good AI summary because it speeds up like what I'm doing. If it has emojis, like I just know that ChatGPT spit that out.
Yeah. The other thing on this is you have to be really careful as a lawyer what you decide to put in writing. And, in the case of I wrote a demand letter and got a response that very clearly had been put through an AI. It was very, very, very bad. And it said things that there was literally absolutely no reason they ever should have said. And that's the level of analysis where like you need to think about these things of like, what is my strategy? Like, when we talk about legal writing with students, we're also, we talk about the statement of facts. It's not just facts, like you're framing things. And so that level of thinking is what we bring to the table as trained attorneys. And you can't just sort of like put a bunch of documents into an AI, push a button and have it write your statement of facts because it might be saying things that you really ought not say.
Yeah. And there's a precision that comes from the law. And these LLMs, unless you are telling them to be very precise, tend to not be very precise. So I'll use an example of how I was doing a Pepsi Coke challenge between Claude and ChatGPT on a question. You were like, how is Pepsi and Coke
I was like,
fall into this, Lee? That's not in the script. I don't know what you're talking about. But the question was around tourist visas in Europe and whether or not someone had met the days and would be allowed to travel back to Europe. So I put this question into ChatGPT without the specific dates. I had like a date that I arrived, a date that I left, and then I added in that I had spent some time outside of this, what they call the Shenzhen region, which I think is how you say it. And ChatGPT said, oh, you are fine. You have so many days. Like these days are dropping off. Like it's no problem. And I read it and I was like, but I'm in this. I don't feel like that's right. And so I went to Claude and I was like, hey, Claude, I basically gave Claude the same information. And Claude's like, well, I need these specific dates because you're very close. Like you're within like a couple of days. So I kept feeding Claude more specific information. Claude was right. ChatGPT was right once I told it what Claude said. And then its response was, oh, yeah, well, I didn't know you wanted me to be really specific.
I didn't know you wanted me to count.
And I'm like, but the whole question was with counting days. And looking for nuances. Yeah. And looking for nuances where I'm like, does the day that you land count? Does the day that you depart count? Like these were all nuances I didn't want to spend. They all count. So if anyone's looking for that answer, but I didn't want to have to go deep into a Google, search to find that. I assumed that these LLMs could do that, which they did. But again, it's like you have to be constantly questioning. And I think that if I'm in school and I'm relying on these AI tools before my analytical skills on these topics are, pretty developed. And like, listen, you and I question everything. Like that's like who we are as people.
And our training as well.
But like, and we've been doing this for a long time, right? That's why people come to us to solve their problems because we're really good at this. But if you're not actively engaging, my friend could have gone to Europe and like been refused, and got to the airport and not been let on the flight, or even worse, not been allowed on the flight back out.
Yeah. It could have been very problematic.
It could have been very problematic if I had just believed ChatGPT's very confident first answer.
Yeah. So I think, if you're thinking of like research topics or anything like that, like, yes, get a rough overview of a topic, generate some ideas, but you have to check all of this. I mean, even if it gives you a citation to something, like you have to go and physically look at that because it may or may not be right, as many, many lawyers have found like already.
Who are now getting malpractice suits against them. Yeah.
As they should. Because I think of any of these tools as sort of a not particularly well-informed research assistant. Very eager to do my work, eager to do my
eager to please.
Very eager to please, but not A, they don't know anything, and B, they may or may not be giving me correct information. So it can be very helpful. However, I cannot fully trust it. So if somebody's thinking about, I'm going to study with this and have it make my outline, I would really question if it's even right.
Right. It's so true. And I think this eager to please thing, which is something you and I have talked about a lot with each other, which is so infuriating. But I think a lot of folks don't really recognize this. I feel like it's not discussed. You and I read a lot of articles about AI. We send them back and forth to each other. But this idea that it is a research assistant who's not well trained and who also will say just about anything to keep you engaged and using the tool is a very important thing to understand. So, let's just pause for a second and remember, these tools, some of them are free. So if it's free, what does that mean?
That means you are the product and they are either going to be, promoting things, advertising to you, and or using your data. So I think that is a very important consideration of if you are not paying, and probably maybe depending, even if you're paying, but certainly if you're not paying, you have to assume everything you put in there is essentially public.
Yeah. And you also have to assume that they are making something off of you, which means that their goal is to keep your eyes on that screen as long as possible, which means they are going to give you whatever answers it believes you want to stay engaged. And I think that that is a very, very important thing to think about. And, Google, back in just the simple search days, sort of did that with the algorithm, but this is so much more targeted and it doesn't necessarily feel that way. In this way, it's a bit more like social media. There's a driver of the time of engagement is so critical. And so you have to see the fact that it's a sycophant should be concerning to you because its goal is one, to capitalize on the fact that we like people to be really nice to us and agree with us, but is to keep your eyeballs there as long as possible. So if you're a law student and you're just I spent 3 hours studying with ChatGPT, make sure that there was actually an output from that, or you're really just giving Sam Altman 3 hours of your eyeballs and who knows what they're doing with that data, time. I mean, who knows? We don't all understand what they are doing, because this is still the wild, wild west.
It really is. The other thing that occurred to me, those AI summaries, you mentioned Google. If you start clicking, if you're skeptical, as we are, and you see some information, it's just either that's interesting, or that's surprising. I often click on the links that they have there. They almost never actually support that statement. So you, again, cannot think I Googled something and I read the AI summary and so it must be right, moving on. It's just not.
Oh, and didn't I send you an article a few weeks ago how an abortion advocacy group was doing some searches and realized that I think it was ChatGPT, was pulling right to life websites and providing that as pro-choice information because it can't tell the difference.
Well, and also because it's just reinforcing all the biases that already exist on the internet. Some of them intentionally created, as in probably this situation, some of them sort of unintentionally created, but all of the things that are out there, they were all ingested into this. So I think you just have to maintain a very healthy level of skepticism while recognizing there are some things that this can be useful for. So,
yeah. All right. Well, here are some other things that it's useful for now that we've ranted about all the problems. like I mentioned earlier, I really think it's helpful for resumes. I saw a resume today come past my desk, which my first thought was this should have been fed into Claude and cleaned up because it was too long. It was hard to read and get through. And I understand if you as an individual are not very good at putting together something like that. I think this is exactly what these tools are designed for. So I would make sure that your resume, is clean and aesthetically pleasing and concise and again, has no typos. I really have no patience for typos. And I am a person who has poor spelling and I understand typos, but like this is what it's for. It like prevents you from having typos. I think that the thing about like professional emails and cover letters, my concern is you definitely don't want it to sound like it was generated by AI. So I think you're better off drafting something yourself and having AI edit it than you are just saying like, hey, AI, write me, a cover letter to work at the Law School Toolbox. Like that's not good. Like I'm going to get that and say like, wow, that sounds like AI wrote that. And I'm probably like not going to be impressed. So.
Right. Although I think there are ways that you can use these tools to say, for example, like take a standard resume, give it, a lot more other information, and then say like, this is the job I'm applying for. These are the things I want to emphasize in a cover letter, like draft it. I want it to be no more than 3 paragraphs. And here's a template that I've used before successfully. Something you have to give it all of that. And then you get the output and you're like, oh, okay, other than that one sentence, it sounds pretty good. But just being like, draft me a cover letter, you're going to get something super generic because the instructions you gave it are super generic.
Super generic. Yeah, exactly. And if I was a hiring person, right, a recruiter right now, the amount of just boilerplate stuff you're getting, you don't want it to look super generic. Nobody's going to pull that and think that that's interesting. Like, so you need to, again, use the AI to enhance your own work, but make sure that you're in there or else there's nothing that's going to stand out.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to this bigger question of what are you using these tools for and what are you bringing to the table? So, if I'm thinking, okay, well, if I know I'm going to be applying for a bunch of jobs, maybe I should make a project in Claude. I assume there are other ways that you can do this in other tools, but, kind of put everything I might want to reference in there. And then we can work with that material. We do stuff like that all the time. Like, let's dump a bunch of stuff in that we think we're going to use, get it like kind of, trained up on it, and then ask questions or do whatever, or have it do things, summarize or like output in different ways. Stuff like that is fantastic. Like, you could have very customized, very like on point, individualized materials for lots of different types of jobs and things and send those out. But again, that's different than just saying, draft me a cover letter.
Right. And you are still responsible for making sure that the materials that you send are perfect. And again, perfection, I think, is going to be expected, not just rewarded, but expected. So for instance, I saw a resume and materials come through my desk today where somebody didn't provide these answers to these questions, which is part of our recruiting process. And maybe they did answer them, but they didn't submit them to me.
Yeah,
and
that was weird.
That's a problem, right? And so that's a problem. You're still responsible for submitting the work. I can't do anything if you don't submit the work. And one of the mistakes law students often make is they will send a cover letter for the wrong firm.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter how perfect your materials are. If you're not cross-checking that you're submitting materials to the right firm with the right firm name and the right whole thing. And I think this cognitive offloading can often make it easier to make these mistakes because you're not like in the work. And so you're like, oh, I did XYZ so fast and then I uploaded all of them. But if they've got mistakes in them, no one is going to read it.
Yeah.
So,
this demand letter response that I got, first clue it might not have been, particularly well thought out was when the opening paragraph had the wrong address in it. And you're like, oh, that's weird. Yeah, no, this is going to be really bad. And it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're still responsible for the work. So, another thing we wanted to touch on was this idea of, is an AI basically like a law student now? we've got some old, no,
I
but
mean,
like,
they can't.
could it pass your classes? Maybe.
I mean,
I don't
maybe.
know.
It probably depends on how you're being tested. I mean, the thing that always is still surprising to me is how many mistakes of like basic logic are being made because they can't do reasoning. Like it is actually just word prediction essentially still. I mean, it seems incredibly impressive, but there's no like distinction between a plaintiff and a defendant necessarily as a concept because there just isn't. And so you get these things where you're like, that doesn't make sense. Like, oh, yeah, you didn't get that these were two separate entities and that matters. So
I think that's true. I mean, I do think that that's one of the things that's very challenging about these LLMs is that most people who are interacting with them don't understand how they work. And
right.
I only kind of understand how they work. But I was at a dinner party where a bunch of people were explaining to me. So that, at least I had that experience. Yes. And you and I talk about how they work and you have more of an understanding of it than I do, since you have a computer science background. But, I do think that that's one of the challenging things is really this idea. Most of us are interacting with these tools who do not understand what they're capable of, right? And this idea that they are doing language prediction. They're not thinking conceptually. They're not human. They're not like doing independent work.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, they're learning. It's like they're not learning really in the way that we mean it. And there are studies showing that people who interact with them less have a much higher, like they give them a better grade on their capabilities. Like the more you interact with them, the more you start to realize like, okay, there are some things they are really good at and there are other things they are not good at all. And it's not always obvious. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and I really think that this, the hallucination problem, which is what a lot of folks probably have read about or heard about, which is just that the AI makes up stuff. To me, that's one thing that can be a bit more obvious. But to me, it's the problems more like my visa research, right? Where it's like, no, I am 100% sure that this is right and it was wrong.
Yeah. And if it's something that matters, like you need to double check that.
Yes.
Or like use two, like sometimes I've used one to check the other, and stuff like that can actually be really helpful because, you're like, oh, wait, it has flagged this issue. Now I need to dig even deeper into that. So, it's not like we're saying like, oh, stick your head in the sand. But I do think, there are concerns. And some of these concerns are around like what your school is allowing you to do and not allowing you to do. And like, you really need to understand that because if you are not explicitly allowed to do something with an AI and you do it and you get caught, like that is potentially disastrous for your entire education and career. So you do not want to find yourself in that position.
No, I mean, I don't think we have the stats out about how many students might not get licensed because of that. But I mean, just as a reminder, everyone, we have to pass a moral character. It used to be cheating, which I guess this would probably be seen as cheating.
Yeah, it would
But
be.
if you were caught cheating in law school, it's possible that your state will just not give you a law license.
Right. I mean, there could be like very, very serious repercussions to this. And, to be fair, I don't think schools and professors are necessarily like fully up to speed on a lot of this. There may be some gray areas, but like you really should understand like what is allowed and not allowed. Because you don't want to accidentally do something that could have like really, really serious problems later on.
Yeah. I mean, even there's a survey from Kavlin in 2024 saying 45% of schools, of law schools, have a policy explicitly banning generative AI for writing their applications essays and their admissions essays. I mean, I'm going to guess that more students than that are using generative AI.
I'm like, how would you possibly police that? But okay.
But again, put it like through like the readers or whatever.
Again, like maybe you think they won't be able to find out, but if they did, that actually like your admission could be revoked and like you're not going to be admitted to the bar. Like, I know these things sound like trivial, but again, like you have to understand what you're allowed and not allowed to do.
Yeah. And I think because the landscape is very varied of which law schools are kind of leaning into AI, which law schools are really saying that they don't want it in the classroom. This is where, places like Reddit, I think, can get folks into trouble because you may, get advice or see like, oh, well, it seems like most law schools allow this, so I should be allowed. And you're still responsible for the honor code that you sign up for when you go to an individual school, and different schools have different policies. And your being held to the standard of your law school. So be careful when you start going down in the deep dive of Reddit and what students are, let's say, getting away with in different schools.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's tricky to understand, but I think you do need to try to understand it. And, I think students, to give people credit, and I talked about this with the law professors, people do want to use this responsibly in general, I think. I mean, obviously, there are people who just want to cut every possible corner. Those people have already always existed. It's no different. And it really, it's just easier to cut corners. But I think most people who are bothering to go to 3 years of law school or 4 years of law school and pay for it actually do want to learn something. And so, I think if your school doesn't really have anything, I mean, we're hearing more about law school AI clubs and things like that. They're having panels and workshops. I think it's, that sort of thing is actually very exciting to me as a former programmer. I think it's cool, I think the bar is starting to require competency. I mean, they already have technological competency requirements that I was talking with Gabe Tenenbaum about recently. But, more and more, they're probably going to start requiring competency in AI. So I think these are things that you don't have to be afraid of necessarily. You just need to think really about how you're going to use them responsibly and how you're going to learn. And is your school going to help you? And if not, there are other things you could possibly be doing. Because I think it is a very quickly developing area and something that people have a lot of questions around.
Yeah, I would say if I was interviewing new associates, I would probably ask questions about AI in my
100%, 100%. So there are just things that, I mean, there are already things you shouldn't be. Yeah, there are already things you shouldn't be doing. If you're gonna actually be efficiently working. And like I said, I think if you have been appropriately trained, you have the basic skill set of being a lawyer. This stuff can drastically accelerate your performance in a firm, or if you start your own firm. All these things. I worry about people not getting that foundation.
Yeah. And to be able to critically evaluate the work. I mean,
100%.
Over and over and over again, I see article after article. I ask people at dinner parties when somebody knows, because the thing is we're in the Bay Area, so it's every other dinner party has someone who codes AI. Sometimes a few people. Some people at Google, some people at Apple, they all talk to each other. It's interesting. But over and over again, the feedback is what we need to be worrying about our children is their ability to, critically evaluate and do creative problem solving and, come up with, different ways to interact with these tools, but to not just cognitively offload to them. And that is true for us adults as well. Yes, we talk about this with our kids, but it's true for all of us.
And I think in a way that kind of brings us full circle to if you can be the skill set person who can direct these tools and use them in productive ways, that's highly, highly valuable. So I don't think people should, be afraid or just stick your head in the sand or be everybody around me is cheating. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think you need to understand what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And then within those parameters, really play with these and push them and explore them. Because I do think they're amazing technologies in certain ways. And I also think they're highly problematic in others.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely don't want to be not engaging with them. But
right.
You want to be smart about how you engage with them.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Well, on that note, have fun with your AI overlords. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second and give us a like or leave a comment. You can have your bot do it. That's fine. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future content. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. We'd be happy to hear from you.